All right, Okairi, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we are back with another episode of Page Chewing. We have both of my lovely co-hosts today, PL Stuart and Steve Talks Books. We're all in one place again, finally. And today our guest is none other but Evan Winter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very, very much for having me. Really excited about this and to talk to all of you. So thank you.
Oh, you have no idea on this end. So, if you don't know, Evan Winter is the author of the Burning series, which I have on display behind me, The Rage of Dragons and Fires of Vengeance. Yes. But before we get started with the full on interview, I like to give our guests just a chance to do a little self introduction. Just tell us, what you do in the book world and kind of how you found yourself here today.
Okay. I guess as quickly as I can tell it, in around 2017, I was between jobs and thought to myself, maybe I should continue looking for that sort of next, like normal person job, if you want to call it that, like that typical 9 to 5 kind of job. Or I could take one sort of last crack at this sort of dream of mine that I've had since literally I can remember being like in grade 3 and saying, I want to be a writer. So I had you had a bit of that severance pay, and I, really should have been spending that time searching for the next position. But I decided I was going to sit down and for 1 year try and write a book. I wrote a book. It was The Rage of Dragons. I self-published it. It was self-published for about a year. And then very, very, very luckily, a senior editor at Orbit Books named Breet found the book, read it, gave me a call and said, you know what, Orbit and me would like to publish this. And that sort of call and that whole sort of, that little moment there kind of changed the course of the way that I'd seen my life going. I mean, I'll be honest, self-publishing had gone pretty well. And I've made tons of friends in the self-publishing world who do very, very well and was learning a ton from them. And there was an opportunity to continue writing as a self-published author. And that at that point was the plan. But there were, after having considered the offer from Orbit and really sort of thinking about where I was in my life and what I wanted to do and to try to achieve, I thought to myself, I'll give this a shot and see how it goes. And I'm very grateful to say that it has gone pretty well. Orbit has been remarkably supportive of the book and of me, and so that's why I'm here today, I guess.
Well, I'm happy they picked your book up. As someone who is now a little bit more into self-pub, thanks to Steve, actually, who is self-pub. He kind of introduced me to the world of it. I think it would have been safe to say that people would have discovered your book eventually. But I'm sure that getting that spotlight on it really helped, the trajectory, as you mentioned in your story there. So I'm glad that it was blown up the way it was, because when The Rage of Dragons was about to come out, when it came out, it was everywhere. And I mean that in the best way possible. So many people picked it up. So I imagine that felt very surreal as someone who thought, oh, I'll just do the self-pub route. And then suddenly you're everywhere.
Yeah, no, it is surreal. I think the craziest part probably was to walk into a bookstore, I'm in Canada. And so up here in Canada, one of the major chains is, hey, one of the major chains is sort of Chapters in Indigo, right? And to walk into one of those bookstores and to go into the science fiction and fantasy section where I have been sort of, I've been like stuck in that section since I was a little kid. And then to see a book with my name on it, that just, it's the feeling, it was indescribable. And I have a son, and so to get to bring him with me and for him to see that, and it just there are no real words to say or to properly express how that moment felt for me. So that was a huge thing. I think that also, even having been self-published, there was a large amount of sort of joy in being able to tell the story and put it out there and have people actually buy it and read it and then leave comments and questions and reviews, and that was really exciting as well. So I feel very sort of, I don't want to say grateful again, but I feel very grateful for the sort of the order of my journey and starting self-published and being able to do it that way, because there's much more of treating it like a business as well. There's a business and an art component, and I'm glad to have sort of been immersed in that world for the first part. And I'm also very glad that I had the chance to experience walking into a bookstore like a Barnes and Noble or Chapters in Indigo and seeing my book there. And to properly rep the indie world, because I really do think I should do that, because I still have a ton of friends in indie, and they are, they are hardcore writers and hardcore business people, and they get their books out there to the world as well. And it's really good to see that even in the indie world now, you are much more able to get your book into bookstores like Chapters Indigo, like Barnes and Noble. It's still more difficult, obviously, than if a traditional publisher is behind you and creating that push and getting those, getting that distribution for you, I should say. But it's getting easier for indies as well. So that feeling that of seeing your book on that shelf, where when you were a little kid before indie was really existed the way it does now, it's possible with both tracks, I think. So to anybody out there who's trying to write or interested in writing, know that both paths are completely valid ways to go.
I couldn't agree more, and I see PL nodding vigorously.
Yeah, of course, Evan is on a completely different level than my books. I totally understand what he's saying. I've been blessed enough to get my books on consignment regionally into Chapters Indigo, and they're wonderful. Chapters Indigo, shout out to them, the premier bookstore in Canada. A little plug for them there. And yeah, when I walk into Chapters and I see my books near Evan's, who is a phenomenal writer whose work I so admire, and the John Gwynns and the George R. Martins, it is surreal. But of course, with you, Evan, I think so much about you is so fascinating, and you're a very humble guy. You gave us that explanation as to how you got where you are. But I think people need to understand that the fact that someone from a major traditional publishing company, from a big trad house, sought you out. Like, normally the route is you query your book to get an agent, and then you might query hundreds, thousands of agents. It might take years for you to get for an agent to pick you up, and then even once that agent picks you up as a client, they have to shop your book, and there's no guarantee that a traditional publishing company will accept your book for a book deal. And then even once you get a book deal, there's no guarantee that that book's successful, it sells, and that you get subsequent book deals. But you, sir, you had someone from a publisher seek you out, wanting to get you on board. So obviously, that's a testament to how successful you must have been. Like I said, I know you're humble, but Rage of Dragons must have completely blown up as a self-published book for someone from Orbit to come looking for you. So can you tell us more about how all that came together, how you managed to basically forego the normal route and get to where you are?
Yeah, you're exactly right about that normal route. It's long and arduous, to put it in epic fantasy terms, I guess. And I think that I feel very fortunate for having gotten a chance to kind of miss having to do that whole thing. And in fact, the part of the reason I chose to self-publish was because I tried to learn about publishing, and I learned that was the typical route, and it just sounded so hard and such a long and winding road to sort of travel. So yeah, I self-published the book. One of the places that I did sort of talk about the book initially was on Reddit's R Fantasy forum. It's a massive forum. Back then in 2017, it probably had about 500,000 subscribers, I think, maybe even a little less than that. And now I think it's roughly around 2 million, I guess. If maybe someone will correct me in the comments or something. But
Someone
roughly
will know
around
that number
exactly.
somewhere.
But roughly around 2 million subscribers. And and so when I was posting there, it was about 500,000, and I was basically sort of saying, hey, I'm a part of this forum. I've been here for a while under a different alt or whatever, and so I finally sort of added my real name as sort of my account, and I was like, I've been here for a while, and I don't know if this is going to go well or not, but I've written a book, in the style of all the stuff that I love to read, and hopefully somebody else here will like to read it. And that post that I made did really, really well over the next couple of days. A lot of people gave the book a shot from that post. And I think because of the traction it got, there are certain places that traditional people in traditional publishing industry, editors or marketers or whatever, are, they visit as well, because they're fans and readers as well as the people who work in this business. So my editor has an account on Reddit, and on that day, I guess, or over that few couple days, she happened to come across the post and gave the book a shot. And I say that because PL's right. Like, self-published books can have a huge impact, can make massive sales. In many cases, sales on the same sort of order as you would see from a big best-selling traditionally published book. You don't often hear about those books, or you don't hear about them as much necessarily, because they're typically sort of maybe more contained to like in the Amazon ecosystem or some of the other online ecosystems, as opposed to both online and offline ecosystems. But they're making mad sales. And I'm very, very happy with how the book did as a self-published author. But like, there were authors doing way bigger numbers than I was. And I think so. It wasn't even that the book was such an outsized success. It was just really, to be honest, right place, right time. And that's, not to, people talk about luck, but really so much of finding success or getting to the place where you hope to be in your dreams or your mind, it does depend on somewhat being in the right place, right time. It does depend somewhat on luck. Like on that day when Breet went online and she saw that post, she could have just kept on scrolling, right? It's so easy to do. And she said something about whatever she saw made her go, oh, that's interesting. Made her actually go seek out that book, pick it up. She would have had to buy it, I imagine, which is very unusual for an editor because they get hundreds and hundreds of books for free. She had to buy that book and then sit there and read it. You know what I mean? And it's wild to think about that process because it's so unlikely. And so what can you call that but luck to a certain extent? I mean, I tried to put in as much work as I could to get to where I got to, but at the end of the day, she's scrolling through Reddit that day and her coffee's not quite ready. She gets up and walks away. She walks back. She forgets what she was doing. She keeps going, and this whole story is different, right? So.
That really seems to ring true for even Travis Baldry, who we talked to. He was like, yeah, right place, right time for me as well. Someone tweeted my art, or the art for the front, and that really helped him. So it really seems like to be a combination of doing the groundwork and that little pinch of magic that sometimes just happens,
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And shout out to Travis Baldry, who has, in all of my dealings with him, and they're sort of mostly just online, he seems like the awesomest, kindest, nicest guy. And he's now a New York Times bestseller, traditionally published, was a massive success indie, is an incredible audiobook narrator. And like you say, he did all the work. It's not like he was just kind of like hanging out and lightning struck. He did all the work, but it still could have not happened in the way it did. And so, but right. It's awesome to see it happen to somebody that nice. So that's really cool.
I think people would argue same for you.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
I just want to put this up because we knew someone would have the number. Zach says Reddit says
whoa. Hey, Zach, by the way. Nice to see you. Awesome. 3.1 now. Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, good to know.
Speaking of very popular and best-selling self-published fantasy authors,
right?
There we go, right there.
Eventually, shall appear.
Just have a couple comments here. Sadia's here. Hey,
another
folks.
Great.
Hey, yeah.
Another great self-pub author.
Thank you. Nice to see you too. Oh my gosh. That's another awesome thing about this is that like there's such a sense of community around like indie publishing and trad publishing too. But like you really see like. It's almost like a slightly big high school because it's a lot of the same faces and names around and stuff. So it's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. I'm reading The Fires of Vengeance right now. I'm jealous. I wish I could read it for the first time again.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it, David. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Go with us.
Another great self-pub.
Oh my goodness.
Rage of Dragons is awesome. Mike Shell says, who is this Evan Winter fellow?
I know Mike, and Mike is also awesome as well. And check out Mike Shell's books if you get the chance. I feel like if you have read my stuff and you like my stuff, I believe you will very much enjoy his work as well. So definitely check it out. You have his books on the shelf behind you there?
Back there somewhere. I have to get to it. Steve, you've read them.
All right. Yeah, they're there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Great trilogy. Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, Iconoclast. Is that how you say it?
Iconoclast.
Yeah. Been on the TBR for ages. One day, I promise, Mike. One day. Khod's here as well. Hello. Just a quick disclaimer that I realized just now. All of these comments appeared in one giant chunk randomly. So Steve had mentioned that the comments were weird on StreamYard. So if you're commenting and it's taken me a while to get to it, they're showing up in big chunks instead of right when you guys send them. So I'm just putting that out there for anyone watching live right now. I am not watching and I will get it up as soon as I see it. But to kind of go a little bit more from the macro to how Fires of Vengeance got to where it is today, to talk a little bit more about the work itself. Your work is praised for many different things, but one of the things you will always hear, myself included, is that your battle scenes are phenomenal. The sequences are just gripping, and there's so many of them in the book, but you never get tired of them in a way that I find can happen. You know, you kind of get battle fatigue and you're like, all right, yeah, swords again. You know, you can feel that way about some books with lots of battle scenes, but I have never felt that way about yours. And I'm curious if that was a conscious effort when you went in, you know, oh, well, I want to focus on battle scenes here. This is something I really enjoy writing, or if it naturally flowed for you and it just became an integral part of your series naturally.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I think that really what I was doing in my approach to writing The Rage of Dragons and just my approach to writing so far is I'm trying to take everything that I enjoy about our genre, everything that I enjoy about reading, and trying to inject as much of that as I possibly can into what I'm writing. So I love, like, I mean, I love books that make me keep turning pages. I love books that that I struggle to put down. I love books that keep me up late at night and that are such an experience because although I maybe have to get up for work or whatever it is the next day, I can't go to sleep because I've got to get through the next section. And so my goal was to write something that would feel that way for me. Like, and you can never really guarantee that it's going to feel that way for anybody else. But I was like, I'm going to put all of the things that keep me turning pages, that make me think, oh my gosh, this is the awesomest thing that has ever existed. I'm going to try and put that into my book, and it's going to be completely focused on what I think is amazing, incredible, compelling, captivating, and changing even the way you think about the world a little bit, hopefully. And if I'm really lucky, I'll be able to find a few readers who kind of read like I do and go, you know what, I love what's in this book. And that was really the goal, because before this, I'd worked as a creative director for an infrastructure firm. I'd been a music video director for about 15 years. And so there was a large part of my job was trying to figure out how to take someone else's idea or concept and make it sort of connect for a broader audience. And it's a struggle because you're always trying to take the amorphous idea of an every person and sort of go, well, these are the kind of attributes that fit into what we're targeting. And you're never like sort of laser focused. It's a very sort of shotgun approach in terms of in terms of the group of people you're targeting. And so it's difficult to do it well. And that's why a lot of commercials, I think, when you're watching your favorite TV show or whatever, and a commercial comes on, you're kind of like, oh, commercials. Because although there might be something in that commercial that would kind of be attractive or interesting to you, or something that maybe you even want to buy, they're almost always too broadly focused. And so that was my job for like 15 years, was to try and target very broadly. And so when I finally had a chance to write for myself, I said, I'm going to throw all that out of the window. I'm not going to try and say, well, what does the market want? Or what do epic fantasy readers want? I didn't try to do that because I'd been trying to do things like that for so long. I said, what do I want? What do I want to read? What do I want to see? And the plan was always to then, as an indie publisher at least, to try to then use the online marketing tools like Amazon ads or Facebook ads or even Twitter ads, which didn't work at all. Sorry, they're musking Twitter and whatever. It did not work at all. Anyway, back on track. Try to use all those online tools to sort of find people who read like me. And so that was the goal. And to not think of marketing the book, which is an integral part of your indie. It's half the job, literally. The hardest part is writing the book. But then the next hardest job immediately after that is to make the book visible enough that people find it and read it, and the right people especially. So my goal was to then say, I'm writing this for me, and that's the hard part. And it really was. It was tough some days to like get the words out, to sit there and do the work. And then the next hardest part, and I was really focused on this, was to say, now I'm trying to find people who read like me. And there'll be people who could pick this book up and read it, and they would absolutely hate it from page 1 to page 500. And that's totally, totally fine. Like, that's just the way it is. All of this stuff, all this art stuff is subjective. And so that was my mentality. And I was like, so I'm going to find the people who read like me, who enjoy the same kind of action as I do. And I leaned all the way into like my literary vices. Like, I leaned all the way in, and I was like, if this rings awesome bells in my head, it's going in. If this bores me even the slightest, it's coming out, because I'm writing the story for me.
Wow, that's incredible. And I have to say, I too am such a huge fan of obviously your entire work, but your battle scenes. I mean, when in the writing community, when you talk about people who write phenomenal thrilling battle scenes, your name is always mentioned along with the Miles Christian Camerons and the John Gwynns and the you name it, right? Like any author who's heralded for their battle scenes, you're mentioned in that list. So hats off to you. And what I love about your battle scenes is the depth and complexity of the battle scenes. But beyond that, you're able to write battle scenes of every type. You can write the one-on-one, brawls, the duels, those really climactic duels. You can write those large scale pitch battles. You can write any type of battle and make it thrilling. And that's a real skill. And I know you have a bit of a martial arts background. Obviously, you've done a lot of research and stuff about warfare and combat. But what do you think is? I know you talked a bit about it there, but what's the real ingredient, the spice of what makes you write battle scenes so well? I know for me, again on your level, but people like my battle scenes because of the buildup, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've read your battle scenes where okay, the buildup is enormous, and it's on that tract of vengeance coming. And I've also read your battle scenes where it comes out of nowhere, suddenly just explodes. The fight just explodes, and that's it. So, but what's your, and you might be able to tell us, but what's like the secret sauce of your skill there?
Okay. Yeah. A big question and a tough one, but yeah, I think thank you for it
Tell
as well.
us
And
all
the
your
kind words.
secrets.
I will do my very best. I think for me, what I'm always trying to, I'll back up a bit and start here. I think that I'm a very plot focused reader. I think that there are character readers and writers or whatever, and there are plot readers and writers, and there's probably several other types of readers and writers out there as well. I've come to learn that I'm very plot focused. I like for everything to move, every single moment in the story to move me closer to the end. Not because I'm in a rush to get to the end, but because then it makes the story feel super taut. Like it feels like a string that's vibrating because it's pulled so tight that it might break at any moment, right? And that's what I love in stories, because when the stories feel that taut, every single bounce of that string, it just makes it go zzz, like it makes that noise, that harmonic noise in your head kind of thing. And so I love for stories to feel like that. And I don't have any issues with stories that are not, but when I'm writing, I think of things almost like, sounds weird, but almost like a video game. You have video games, and oftentimes they have side quests, right? And they help you fill out the world and understand the space and really get into the characters and the whole thing of that video game world. Whenever I played video games, I'd be going straight to the end. Like I wasn't a side quest kind of guy. Like that just wasn't me. And so I thought to myself, that's who I am. And again, in an attempt to write the perfect book for myself, I was like, I don't want side quests. I want a story that is, whenever we tell stories to each other, even if you're talking about your day, there's a reason or a purpose that you're telling it, right? And as to quote Brandon Sanderson, journey before destination, for sure. But I think that for me, the journey is made all the better when it is sort of charging for that destination in a certain way. And so when I'm writing fight scenes, there's always the goal of having every action, every beat, every moment building towards where we're going at the end. People don't often think of fight scenes necessarily as side quests, but I think they can sometimes become side questy. And so I'm always trying to say, well, if there's a fight scene here, what is it doing that's leading us to where we're going? How is it helping me build to where we're going at the end? And part of what helps me do that is that I'm a plotter. I'm not a pantser. I've said this a few times, but my books are around 500 pages. My outlines for those 500-page books are about 100 pages for outline, right? So the outlines are very detailed. They have every single moment and every single scene sort of listed out. I know who the characters are in the scene, what their names are. So by the time I'm writing, I know all the stuff. I know where the story begins, where it goes to the middle, where it goes to the end. And so the advantage of that in sort of that like very taut style that I try to aim for is that in the outlining stage, when I hit a fight scene or a big battle moment, I know why it's there, and I know how it's meant to build towards the end. So that allows me to create it so that the fight scenes always, they're never pushing the story to the side, like they're never pushing off the main storyline. They're always ideally and hopefully keeping us going straight towards that end. And then the second thing I really try to do is what happens to those scenes in editing. As I'm editing and going over and over those scenes, I try to make the words disappear off the page for me when I'm reading them. So I reread those sections over and over and over again. And whenever a comma trips me up, whenever a word choice trips me up, I try to strip it out, change it, and alter it until I can read through the entire fight scene section and not feel the words at all. Because we can read something that's poetic and beautiful, and the words are part of the way we experience and enjoy that. When I'm writing a fight scene, it's meant to be primarily visceral. I think of things as either visceral, intellectual, or emotional. And I try to strip away the intellectual for the fight scenes and aim for the visceral and the emotional. So the intellectual often is the words and the type of word choices and the way we construct the sentences. I try to read those sections over and over again and edit them over and over again until the words disappear, until there's just moment to moment to moment, beat to beat to beat, action to action to action, without stopping or slowing down to take in the beauty of the words. It's not about that in those moments for me.
It's a fantastic breakdown. and it really does come through on the pages. There's an urgency to your battle scenes, to the story, that really rings true to everything that you just said. So it clearly comes through the page. Tao as a character also seems to really embody these things. And we had a couple comments here before we move on from battle scenes that have popped up here. Beth says, I'm marginally familiar with physical training with swords through recreation, and the training sequences were gripping. I was absolutely absorbed in them, and they ring true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Training sequences are another huge part of your book as well. It's not just battle with other people. And we're going to keep this spoiler free. So I'm not going to say how you're able to fit so many training sequences in that allows you to push characters in a way that they might not be able to be pushed otherwise. But I really loved that aspect of that as well. You could really explore things that way.
I will say real quick then that about that, that was one of the toughest parts of book one, was trying to figure out how I wanted to do that. And again, without spoilers, there is sort of something that happens within the nature of the world that has been that within which the story exists, that allows the main character to achieve things that should normally not be able, that normally one could not achieve. And I knew where I wanted to take the character. I knew where the story was going to go, but it took me a long time to figure that part out. That was probably the part where I got stuck the longest in book one. And the funny thing is, after having written The Rage of Dragons, I realized that people have done things that are similar. Obviously, no idea is unique in the world, but people have done similar-esque things in anime, in manga, in all these other places that I wasn't as familiar at the time. And so, it's like I was sitting there beating my head against the wall, trying to reinvent the wheel to a certain extent. And as always, ideas are amazing, but the execution is what makes any individual idea. So I hope the execution in the book is interesting and different enough that it doesn't ever feel, even to people familiar with the concept, it doesn't feel like a rehash or anything. But it took me a long time to figure out what many other writers had figured out before. So that's a little story behind that stuff.
Well, we all have our own journey, right? To get to our own ideas. Just because they're not original doesn't mean we're aware of them all, right? Mm-hmm. In our sphere of life. Minesh says, I started the series on Petrick's recommendation, another fantastic booktuber. Mm-hmm. But man, once you start this book, you can't stop before you finish it. And then you will need the next book immediately. Thanks for all the entertainment.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And these are the kind of comments that are the absolute awesomeness to me, because again, that's how I read. And those are the books that I love the most, are the ones where it feels like that. So thank you so much.
Yes, Zach says, to me, the battle scenes were all about Tao's passion. I wasn't reading his experience, I was living it. The character work was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Zach.
And actually, if you wouldn't mind me taking that little tidbit to talk about Tao for a second, because you mentioned that you are a plot-based author, and we can see that through, like I said, the urgency of the story itself. But I would also argue that Tao's character, the development of it, as Zach just said, is key to understanding and enjoying the story. And I'm famous on my channel for saying I think Tao is one of the dumbest main characters I've ever read about, but I still like him. Like, I usually don't like characters who make dumb choices, but for some reason with Tao, it works. And usually the way that I've kind of conceptualized it in my head, the way it works for me is because, one, it fits his story. I don't think it's a spoiler to say this is a revenge story. It is. So it fits his one-mindedness in that pursuit. And also it fits the side characters because they fill those gaps for him. And then when they don't, you see the fallout of that. And he's consistent in that single-mindedness. The consistency as well seems to work for me. But he's not the smartest tool in the shed with his choices. So I'm wondering for you, was that, again, it's kind of similar to my first question, but a conscious choice, or did the character develop around the plot, or did you know who Tao was before the plot came to fruition and he just happened to slot in it that way?
I think Tao and the story kind of came together at the same time. I think largely because I kind of was picturing and could see this world, this sort of very oppressive world that sort of created a large sense of weight on a person like Tao. I think that the idea of who he is someone for whom society never offers the benefit of the doubt. And it's kind of like, I think of him this way sometimes. He's the kind of person where, given the way society views him, if, for example, he was stopped by the police, as an example, it doesn't matter what choice you make. It's still very easy for that encounter to go very, very wrong because of his place in society. And so it often feels like he makes really dumb or short-sighted decisions, but there's almost no decision that can be made that can guarantee him a positive or a good outcome. And in that case, when the world treats you like that over and over and over again, at a certain point, it becomes easier and perhaps feels like almost the only thing that you can do is to lash out. And then things often get even worse and even worse, but there's no good choices that can be made. It's not like you can just game it out so that everything works out for you, because he is in a caste-based society that never offers him and the people he loves the most the benefit of the doubt. So one wrong step can mean the worst thing that can happen to you. And so I think that when I was writing him, a lot of the choices he makes feel very real to me, given his rough age, given his circumstances and situation, and the overall world in which he exists. It's that feeling. It's the feeling of being someone who is oppressed both tacitly and explicitly. It's the feeling of being someone for whom the world was not built. It was not meant for you to succeed in that world. And then when you're young, you don't quite realize that. You get older and you start to see it more and more places. You start to see it everywhere. And then that starts to affect your psyche and the way that you interact with that world. So his choices do very much feel real to me, because I would always sit there and the circumstances in a scene would come out to play. And I would say, well, what does this person do in this circumstance? And every choice he makes is something, at the very least, that I understand on both an instinctive and emotional level. Like I and it's easy for you will probably, as any author, all of you here, you wouldn't probably write something that didn't feel that way to you. But I can honestly say that every single choice he makes, I have tried very hard to make it feel real to me. As I've gotten older in watching media, reading media, one of the things that's bothered me more and more is when I feel as if a choice in the story doesn't make sense given my understanding of the story. And so I've tried very hard to remove that from my own books, at least from my perspective. And again, there'll always be someone who will view Tao and actually not enjoy him. So thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed him, Taylor. But there'll be people who actually don't enjoy him because of the type of person he is, the type of choices he makes, because it's too far removed maybe from what they can either appreciate or understand about the things a person might do or not do in certain circumstances. And that's completely understandable to me, right? Like I get that. But for me, he feels very, very real, like in a way, So yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. I guess on that, along those lines, I guess there's a few questions I have jumbled in here that first of all, you speak to the world and the caste society that where Tao is a lesser, and they are always at the bottom rungs of society, and irrespective of what their actual position in that society is, what their actual job is, what they do, and of course they're only allowed to do certain types of hold certain types of positions. And in that, and this is aside from that, but your world is so lush. It's African, obviously inspired, and it's so rich. And your world building. I think sometimes because your battle scenes are so exceptional, some people forget how exceptional your world building is. It might get lost sometimes, but I certainly recognize it. And you know, what made you write? So two things. What made you write essentially a world that's analogous to an African type world, and what made you write about the oppression and the caste system and that element of your, which is integral to your story. What made you do that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that in terms of the first part of the question, I grew up in Zambia, which is right in Central Africa there. I think it's just south of the equator. Someone's going to have to check me on that too. But, and so I do say that the book is sort of set in the secondary world analogous to Africa, exactly as you described it. And the truth is probably more that it's less marketable to say it, but the truth is probably more that it really is centered around my own experiences in Zambia and my understanding of the environment, the geography, the feel of the landscape, the feel of the people. Because Africa, again, is this massive continent that's if you ever get the chance, there's a bunch of those maps that you can look at, those like globes that you can look at that actually properly lay out the size of the different continents and the different countries. And Africa is massive. Zambia, where I grew up, which was colonized by the British, is larger than the entire United Kingdom. And it's a small country in the middle of Africa, and it's bigger than the entire United Kingdom in terms of overall space. And so I guess I grew up reading books, fantasy, my whole life. And they never had, or the ones I encountered never had landscapes that I was used to, people that I grew up with, and all that. And I sort of said to myself when I started to write, at first I was like, well, how do I write a story, a fantasy story that I would enjoy? And of course, because of everything that I had read, it was going to be, knights and round tables and rolling meadows and castles and moats and stuff like that, because that's what I knew. And then I said, but that's also not really what I know. That's not what I know from my own life. And that sort of that advice of write what you know, I guess stuck with me a little, whether it's good advice or not, I don't know. We've all heard it. And I sort of stuck with me and I was like, okay, maybe I should be doing a bit more of that. And so I wanted to write about the place I grew up. I wanted to write about the feel of the sun on your skin, about the way things grew or didn't grow, the look of the scrub grass to a certain extent, the fact that I almost had not seen mountains until I came to North America, the fact that the first time I came to Canada, when we were flying on the plane, I looked out the window and I was young, right? I wasn't even a teenager yet. And I had never seen that much water in my life. Coming from Africa, when you fly over Canada, there's more water than land here, it seems like, in the plane. Like it's just lake, water, water, water. I'd never seen that before in my whole life. And so I was like, I'm going to write about the place that I know, because it's so different in a way, but it was so familiar to me. So yeah, the book is set in a secondary world analogous to Africa, but really it's set in a place that reminds me of my experience as a child in Zambia.
It absolutely comes through, and it's refreshing, in a way to be in a different setting, because it allows the reader who is used to the same type of works that you mentioned with the rolling meadows and the castles and stuff. It's a different setting to immerse yourself in. You're like, oh, I don't know this. A lot of people I know who read the book felt that way about it, myself included. When you read it, oh, wow, this is not something that I can skip over the description of because I've never seen this description before. It really drew me in as well. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So I guess, Evan, and that's an incredible answer. Thank you for that. So I guess the second part is back to the caste system, describing the oppression. What motivated you to want to write about themes such as that?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about. I wanted the story to have an understanding of its world that I was taking a little bit from ours. Right? It's an abstraction, but I wanted it to sort of speak to what I was starting to read about and learn about more in real world Earth history and things like that. And I started to get way more into reading and researching about about history and everything else, even before I wrote The Rage of Dragons. And then I was trying to say, well, this is a fantasy world. How do I separate it from all of the sort of the historical baggage that we have, but still have a discussion with myself, still ask myself questions that I am still seeking answers to. And I think that that's what writing is for me in a lot of ways. Is maybe it's a form of therapy to a certain extent. Is I'm asking a lot of questions, and one of the goals that I have is not to necessarily try to answer them for the reader, especially, but maybe not even answer them for myself, but to ask the questions and to explore them, to try and better understand the world that I exist in and the human condition, as at least as I can see it from my very biased perspective of just living the life from only from this perspective, right? I try to be empathetic and understand everybody else as best as I can, but everything that I'm putting into the books is me trying to better understand the human condition from my limited perspective, and by asking questions to do that.
Yeah, I feel that answer deep in my soul. Taylor and Steve, who know me well, they know that I feel that answer deep in my soul. That's incredible. That's why you write that, and it really works. It really works in terms of for Taylor specifically, and knowing that he always feels, no matter what position he holds, he's about to be crushed underfoot, and he can't escape. In some ways, so much of his revenge is wrapped up in not being able to escape his background, his upbringing, and his position in society. And so many of the people he's looking to take revenge on are people who would normally oppress him and people like him. And it just makes it so much more powerful and just so much more dramatic and just so much more when he actually gets those moments of revenge, it's frankly so satisfying. You're sitting there, it's like, yes, right? And because he is essentially one of the oppressed, right? So yeah, I just found it amazing.
Thank you.
Something else I also enjoy is you take the micro scale there and also the macro scale. So Tao is of the lowest of the low in his society, but then you look at what his society has done to others when they first arrived. let's not give anything away, but when they first arrived, they have also, it's not just within society, it's being part of a larger group of people who have done that in history. And I'm not saying that you were specifically drawing parallels to the real world, because I think that it's important, like you said, to ask questions in a fictional way, because that allows us to look in the mirror without the baggage of history, which is what you already mentioned. But just reiterating that, I think that a lot of fantasy that delves into these things allows us to reflect in a way that's a bit more honest with ourselves. And so I'm not saying that you were drawing an allegory there. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I think it's really important to view oppression from different sides like that. And that's something that really struck me from your book, is it wasn't just one story here. It was within a larger context of how that action affects even cultures as a whole and groups as a whole. Thought it was a very well articulated discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. And no, and that's exactly, thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to do as you describe it. And so I'm glad it feels that way as you read the books. And again, I know that for some people it won't feel that way, or maybe the discussion will seem as if it's trending or heading in a direction that they go, I don't know if that feels right to me or whatever. But my hope is always to ideally find people who are interested in having the discussion in the same way that I am, so that we can sort of talk about it together in the same way that I think we often talk about art being in conversation with other art. And that's also kind of what I was doing as well, in terms of, with all the books that I'd read in epic fantasy, I do try and be, to a certain extent, in conversation with them as well, in terms of the characters that I'm interested in seeing come to life in the work that I'm working on, the worlds and the way they come to life. It's trying to be in conversation with the other books in the genre. And so as I'm writing, as I'm world building, as I'm creating, as I'm asking myself questions through fiction, I'm trying to combine my current understanding of the world as I can appreciate it, with my favorite fiction, and all that I love from that fiction. And I'm trying to learn and entertain myself at the same time. Um, I'm trying to learn what it means to live and exist as a person. To be again, it always comes back to me. It always comes back for me to the human condition, and I'm trying to better examine that while still hopefully having the absolute best time I can. And that's my goal. I think is really to just can I can I enjoy the heck out of life while still hopefully getting better at it? If that makes any sense at all, I don't know.
I wish we all hope for that. We all hope for that. I just wanted to put a couple comments up here. Monet is here. Hi, Monet. She says, Tao is my favorite no thoughts, head empty character because Tao has one goal and you know it. And it's so entertaining to watch him disregard anything else outside of his one goal. Yes.
Thank you very much, Monet. And he
It's one of
can be very no thoughts, head empty. I won't deny it.
Well, it's one of those things where you know the decision that's going to be made before it's made. You're like, oh no, Tao baby. But the consistency is there, like you said,
Yes.
and that's why it works, because you know. We have here, for me, Tao represented the common man's anger towards the injustice inflicted by his oppressors. Perfectly timed comment.
Yeah, and that's sort of, and again, that's also what I'm trying to do, and yeah, and by putting myself to a certain extent in his shoes, and trying to say, what does this really feel like, and what's the outcome of the way that the world treats you? I think it's in book 2, and this is gonna be hilarious because I'm about to butcher my own quote, but it's sort of like I'm actually not even attempt. It's the line that he's talking to Queen Siora, and he says, and she says, "Well, what is rage?" And he says, "She says, what is rage? Is it like love?" And he says, "It's rage is love turned in on itself when it has." Wow, I really cannot. I cannot do the quote. That's hilarious. But yeah, basically, he's talking to her about how rage and love can be two flip sides of the same coin, and how rage is that same passion that you put into love that comes out of you when you feel as if the world will offer you no other opportunity to live life as you wish you could live it, and not live. So yeah. And now I'm circling back in my head and thinking to myself, one of the things that actually helps me when I write, I swear I believe this, it may not be true at all, is that I am massively forgetful about my own work. And so when I read it during editing, it's literally like I'm reading something that somebody else wrote. And so it's awesome for me because the way that helps me as a kind of like a mini superpower is that when I'm reading my own work, I go, oh, that's dumb. I don't like that. And I change it to what it's like getting to read your favorite book, except you can change it to be better as you go. You can change it to be more of what you like as you go. And because I can never remember anything, like as I'm reading the work, it feels totally fresh. Like, how they say, write a thing, and then before you edit, give it 6 months, let it sit. I can write it, get to the end, go back to the beginning, and I have no clue what's happening back there. And I'm just reading it fresh. And so I get to kind of like fix it like with fresh eyes. So yeah, the power of being forgetful.
Oh, that's awesome. I had a kind of a technical writing question, not that technical, but it's funny. A bunch of writer friends and myself, we're talking about our books, and we all write series, some of us long series, and we're talking about the to be or not to be. In some cases, what we feel is the dreaded big synopsis before book 2 or book 3 to explain what's gone before, versus organically weaving what's happened in the plot, or somehow recapping, or just going cold and not really recapping at all much events from the previous book. And what I loved about what you did specifically, as far as Vengeance was, and without spoiling, you had a character that had missed out on events, and then you had another character explain that to him and essentially recap a lot of what happened in the previous. And I thought that was a really great and fantastic stylistic choice. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. Just so I guess it's a 2-part question. So what made you do that as opposed to doing the dreaded, 2-page recap of this what happens in Rage Dragons, and this is where we are now, or trying to weave that more in bits and pieces of what characters thought or inner monologues throughout the story, So why did you choose that route? And second, these are things that we have to do as writers, especially for writing a series. So, is it really difficult writing a series to handle these more technical, cool, crazy things? Okay, geez, how do I make people remember what happened last time? Like, yeah, so that's my question. Those are my questions.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the second part. And I'll say I think it is really difficult because there's been a multi-year gap between Fires of Vengeance and there will be a multi-year gap between Fires of Vengeance and when the Lord of Demons book 3 comes out. And so that is hard because as much as I wish everybody read my books and nothing else and just sat there waiting for me, as if like in like a little void of where no information gets in and they're just waiting for my next book. That's not what happens. And we're constantly consuming tons of media, tons of stories. I'm doing that as well. And so when I find that I haven't been with the book for a year, 2 years, whatever, and I come back to it, I usually just jump right in and just read. And a lot of the books that I have read don't necessarily really give you too much of the backstory, and they just let you plow through. And I can usually make my way through and stumble, but I am forgetful. And part of the joy of each of these worlds I think that we all create is when they feel as fully fleshed out as possible, when we remember everyone's motivations and their purposes and their goals and everything's sitting in our heads, because then we can really appreciate what's happening in the new book. So what I tried to do with book 2 was I wanted everybody to be on the same page, I guess is a funny way of saying it, but I want everybody to be on the same page with the continuing story and to really feel as if they had come back to it as if they just put the last book down. Now, it might be a little frustrating if you literally just put the first book down and picked up the second book, because then it is sort of working a little bit as a recap. But I thought it was important to really catch people up in that way. And what I tried to do is to make it so that it wasn't just as you know from last week kind of recap, is there are things that are happening in that part of the story that affect what happens in the rest of the book, that actually add to the overall progression of why things continue on the way they do for several characters. So that was sort of the way I tried to do it. Is I said, if I'm going to explain, if I'm going to talk about book 1 in book 2, it has to be such that what's being talked about affects book 2 directly. Otherwise it is just extraneous, right? It's just, or not extraneous, but it's just, I'm just doing it for a technical reason as opposed to a narrative reason. And I didn't want to do that. I always wanted it to be narrative as well. Now, having done that in book 2, like it's tricky because the world continues to get bigger. And with book 3, I'm not sure that I'm going to do that again, for example. But I have to then start to the second part of your question, PL, figure out how do I make sure that everybody who's joining me for book 3 can still feel enough from book 1 and book 2. And that is a technical challenge because I personally as a reader, I'm not a big fan of the whole, as from kind of discussions, dialogue, or even just narrative. But you still need everybody to be fully on page with the motivations. I was recently watching a couple TV shows. We all sit down as a family. We watch a bunch of shows at night, and I was recently watched something with the family, and I think we'd stepped away from the show for a little bit, and characters were behaving in a way that I couldn't quite understand, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And so I'm messing up the story a bit, because what happened is I'd watched this whole thing, I'd stepped away from it a bit, and I couldn't quite understand the character motivations. I recently now watched that show, the entire show, again with my son. And in watching it with him, I understood what was happening way better because there was no break. I went right through. So when I first watched that show, I had a lesser experience with the show, and I thought, oh, they're not really, like, this doesn't quite make sense. These characters aren't quite consistent. Like, I don't know why this person's doing this. And it was not because the show or the writing wasn't doing what it needed to do. It was because I had taken a break and had forgotten all the little intricate details that were being built into the story. And so when I watched it again with my son and we went right through the show, I was like, oh, that makes way more sense. And now I get it better. So it's so difficult, I think, as a writer to sort of find that balancing act, right? Of making sure that you're telling a story in a way that is not constantly referencing back and back and back for readers who are on top of your story, versus always moving forward and perhaps leaving behind enough that readers who are missing little bits and pieces will actually have a less good experience with the story you're telling. So yeah, and I think with longer series, it's the balancing act becomes even more difficult, right?
Yeah, I hear you. Right, seven books over here. I hear you.
Right? Like, well, how do you? I mean, not to turn it back around on you, but then how do you do it, or what do you try to do to make sure that you've got that balance going?
Oh,
Yeah,
Piel, a taste of your own medicine.
yeah, no, I guess I chose the try and weave it organically somehow, not too obviously, but still enough into the story so that, and because so many of the plot threads carry on through the entirety of the series, I thought, okay, like with each book, it's almost like you leave a little bit less behind. So, you're not gonna really hear obviously things about book one and book four, unless it's some major overarching thing that, like you're not going to hear about that. You might hear a little bit about book three, but you're probably not going to hear about much about book two, and you're still not going to hear about what happened. Do you know what I mean? So it's unless it was some major event. So that's what I chose. And as you kind of because you kind of indicated, it's really up to the reader to decide were you effective or not, right? You do your best, and some readers are going to feel left behind. Some will love it. Some, like you said, who are really on top of like every single little thing. Oh yeah, back in book one, Evan said this and blah blah. Like they're readers that are so keen and that they're so detailed and meticulous in how they will analyze your book. Yeah, and in Rage Dragons, this is gonna happen in book. And for those people, it's not an issue. But for the people that need more of a refresher, yeah, it's so yeah, it is a bit of a juggling act, but I guess the proof's in the pudding, right? People will tell you, oh, this was too recap heavy, or this really worked for me. And of course, there'll be varying opinions. For some people, something may be too recap heavy, and for some people, it's perfect. So,
I like how in your discussion of Evan Winter, you also, I don't know why I said your last name, Evan. I like how you, and that maybe I'm so used to saying your name is a set by Evan Winter, it just comes out that way. But I like how you mentioned that it has a connection to other media as well, because Steve, his name is Steve Talks Books here, but he also has Steve Talks Movies channel. And I imagine, as someone also who has worked in both fields, you were in, TV and had to work in that sphere for a long time as well. It's across all media, how to try to connect these stories. I mean, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a big one. I don't know I stopped after Infinity War. Look, I'm just gonna roast myself here in public on Maine, but I don't know what's happening anymore. And so I'm curious if Steve, if you had any thoughts on, as a reader and as someone who's an avid consumer of TV and movies, do you find your experience is similar to what we've been talking about, that it can be, the balance is difficult to strike?
Yeah, it can definitely be. I was actually curious, Evan, if was there ever a movie or a book that, because you said you've been reading fantasy for a while, is there a story that sticks out for you that you can go back to and say, this is what got me into fantasy, this is what made me want to write my own stories?
Oh, that's a tough one. I have been enjoying fantasy for such a long time. I think that I mean, I grew up on like sort of these slightly absurdist, interesting worlds of Roald Dahl, and even before that, some of the um, other books. And I loved that kind of stuff, that kind of fantastical storytelling from there. But that was still sort of all based on Earth, really, right, on our world. And then I guess one of my first introductions to fantasy was probably Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore. And then I got all the way into the Dritz books and read all the Menzelbrandsen ones and the Underdark, and really enjoyed those as well. I think that's when I was like, oh, okay, this is where I'm the happiest when I'm reading. Like, I can read, historical fiction or romance or anything else and have a perfectly good time and enjoy the stories. But like, no one pulls out swords and there's no dragons and there's no magic. And I'm sort of like, well, you guys are missing something here. Like, you could imagine if this was this story and there was magic, like that's even better. Like, let's be honest. So I don't know. I loved the idea of how I think in the books that I love, the magic and the world building adds to the questions that can get asked by the writers. So yeah, it started way back then, probably with a lot of the Forgotten Realms books. And then I just kept reading fantasy. I read other things, but you read. I'll pick up sometimes. That's a really highly lauded literary fiction book, and they'll be great, but they're still not fantasy. And so I always have to come back home. Yeah, and so that's where I love to be, and I just think there's something extra about the way that we can tell stories in our genre that excites me.
I can certainly relate to that. I've definitely had the thought, this is awesome, but what if there were dragons? You know, what if? Could definitely relate to that. We just had a couple comments here from a while ago. I want to make sure I get up. Mike says, good writing is often an exercise in empathy. It's one of the reasons reading broadens our own sense of connection.
I'm a firm believer in all of that.
Yes. Monet also says something that I very much agree with. Rage of Dragons is one of the best prequels I've ever read. I still very much want that story. I think she's talking about the intro right there. Oh my God.
Thank you. And you know
From
what?
page 1.
A quick little story about that. That was probably not the easiest, I'll say, the fastest writing that I've ever done. Like I sat down, I plot heavily, so I had the whole story plotted for Rage of Dragons. I sat down and that entire sort of prologue came out in like 1 or 2 writing sessions. And I have been chasing that dragon ever since, because it's a struggle to write as fast and as quickly. And also with that prologue, almost none of it changed. Like even after Orbit picked it up, almost none of that changed. It's sort of stayed from draft 1. It's basically, I had to add a comma here or do this or that, but it just stayed. And it just came out so fully formed. And again, like I say, I've been chasing that ever since. Like everything else feels a little bit harder. Now, maybe it's, in fairness, some of it's because there's the weight of everything that's been written before sitting there. And PL, talking about a 7-book series probably feels that very much. I think that's also maybe what George R.R. Martin feels, although I don't want to speak for him, but I look at the density of the world that he's built, and I have to imagine that every new word comes harder because it has to lift the weight of all that's come before it as well, right? This character can't say this or move in this direction or arrive here at a certain time because the plot demands it. They can't do that. They have to do it in a way that the world allows. And so the longer and the bigger your world, the more that's there. And so I think that even as I get deeper into a series, I do feel that. I feel the weight of everything that comes before behind me. And so, yeah. And so there's more responsibility. There's just more to look out for and to watch out for, I think. So that's been an interesting experience for me, at least, trying to finish up the series.
Wow. Yeah.
Really quick question about seeing your book in the bookstore. Have you ever stealth autographed your own books?
You know what? No, I've actually I've asked the people in the booksellers in the store if I can assign them, and they've always been really, really good about it and super awesome. One time I had to show ID to do it, and I think the ultimate fear is always that you ask, and I've heard other authors say that they've asked, and they've been like, oh, my books are here, and can I sign them? And one bookstore was like, no, why would you? If you sign them and we don't sell them, we can't return them to the publisher. And and I guess that's true, but that author, and they tell the story, they're like, I felt so bad and so small, and so there's always a risk in all of this. So, but so far, it's been good and fine, and the bookstores seem excited to have you sign them, and they'll put the little stickers on that say like signed by the author, and that's really cool. So yeah. But
I love that. Just that image of an author being like, can I sign the thing that I put in the world? And they're like, no, we're going to gatekeep that from you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I know we're winding down too, but I want to also, and I know obviously you cannot give away spoilers. You can't give away the plot. This is an incredible series that so many people are just jazzed about. You were Rage of Dragons, one of the Times top 100 books. Like that's a huge honor. Congratulations, kudos on all the accolades you've been getting, Evan, and so well deserved. I'm a huge fan of your writing. So this is more of a comment that you can't really say. Like, so I look, as a writer, I look at what you've written so far, and I look at the tale, and I look at the prologue of Rage of Dragons, and I look at what I've seen so far, and I see, I know these aren't things you can answer, but I have hopes that Teo will survive. But I wrote this in my last review that I don't know if he will, and I know you can't answer that. But what I will say is this: is that sometimes I wonder if so much of Teo is about his journey for vengeance and ticking off these people on the list, and once, like, will he be allowed to have real happiness? Because for so much of it, he's a weapon in some ways for the people that choose to use him as such, and he's his own weapon, his own instrument of seeking vengeance. So you wonder, once perhaps that usefulness is used up, will Teo just retire on a beach, and just, you wonder if he'll have that happy ending. And I know you can't tell us that, but I will say that, it makes me as a reader very care about him, very nervous for him, and wanting him to have that happy ending, even whether or not it's justified, and that's for obviously the reader to decide, and for you to write the way you see fit. But I think back to that prologue, and that prologue, makes you wonder, like, I know, I write a lot of circular plots. What has gone before is going to happen later. And, so I can't wait to see how you wrap up this series.
Well, thank you. And I mean, thank you. I actually do have the ending already planned. And so I do have the answer to that question. I know where it's going. It feels resonant to me. It feels appropriate to me. And I can only hope that it will end up feeling that way for readers who follow me all the way through the 4 books as well. I'm excited to get to that point. I'm disappointed in myself that I have taken as long as I have to get book 3 finished and out into the world. I think that maybe you all know this already, and you probably do, but I feel very much like traditional publishing, ideally, at least for a long time, has enjoyed trying to get people out every single year. It makes for a sort of a smooth transition from marketing into placement in bookstores, into sales, into that lull that almost all books kind of hit, back into marketing, and then it sort of goes perfectly like this, right? And that's a really sort of good. It's a really good way of keeping books going and getting sales and making sales sort of keep going in a strong sort of positive fashion. And also, it's just good for readers, right? Like, they get those books out every single year. And book 3 has taken me longer than the other 2. Although Fires of Vengeance was tough as well. Rage of Dragons was the easiest. Fires of Vengeance was tough to do. And then Lord of Demons it hasn't felt tough yet, but it's just been slow, just a lot slower going. And it bothers me that I've been slow, because I wish I could have gotten it out faster so people could read the story, like, so they don't forget as much, so they can, like, get through it faster. And also what starts to happen, I think, which is a danger, is that a lot of the ideas, a lot of the world building, a lot of the stuff that goes into the books has to do, I think maybe for all of us, right, has to do with what we're experiencing in the world. And then the longer you take to get the thing out, the thing that you were experiencing that felt really sort of important in that moment starts to drift a bit into the rearview mirror, right? And so it's a struggle to kind of be like, how do I keep what felt so important to me in that moment as important to me in the now, so that when the readers read it, it still feels like it still feels to them like it's super important as well. I mean, I think I'm not articulating this idea super clearly, but it's just that for me, it would definitely have been better to have worked faster. And so all that leaves me to do is to then try and deliver even more with these books, because I think that I've lost the advantage of time. So now I have to really say, well, okay, we have to dig even deeper into what was exciting for me about these, so that the readers, they may not feel as timely, but they still feel as important, I hope.
I can understand that sentiment just as a person who writes reviews. Like, the longer my reviews feel different if I write it right after I read it, or if I wait and marinate on it and then write it later. There's a very different feel to those reviews. So I imagine writing a story would follow the same pattern. It changes over time. Your thoughts as you marinate on ideas change, right? So it sounds very natural to me, what you're describing.
I think, yeah, thank you. And I think that Rebecca Kwong, who wrote The Poppy War, and recently Babel just came out, she said something that was really interesting to me, and I think and really sort of, like, blew my mind a little bit. But she started writing when she was in her late teens, The Poppy War, and finished it, like, several years later, but still pretty quickly. But she was saying that the things that she was so focused on in the beginning, and were so important to her in the beginning, changed as she aged, right? And your concerns change a little bit. But the trick of it is that you kind of have to dance with the one who brung you. So you've got this story and you're telling it, and you as a person have changed, but the story can't feel like it changes too much. It still has to be that same story, that same heart. And so that's also a trick in terms of craft building. I think for a lot of writers is to make sure that you bring all of the new you to the story without taking out the heart of the old you. You know what I mean? And so I thought that was interesting that she said that, and actually helped me to understand what's important for me to do as I continue. Is that the story has to still very much be what it always was, but I'm going to try to bring everything that's new about me into it as well, and hopefully that just makes it feel bigger and better. That's the hope, but we will see.
That's I've never heard it described that way before, and that's really, that hits home. So we don't want to take up too much of your time. These always go so quick, and I know that we probably all have a million questions still, but I wanted to bring it home by giving, first bringing up a previous comment and then giving you a chance to kind of sign off and tell people where they can find you. But earlier in the comments, someone had asked how many books are planned for the series, and Monet had commented saying, I believe 4 books are planned, but I wanted to give you a chance to discuss that, of course, yourself. I believe it's a quartet, yes, is what we can expect.
You're exactly right. Monet's right as well. It's 4 books planned. It's been 4 since the very beginning when I was sitting there first writing The Rage of Dragons in the library, in my local library, and it is still 4. So yeah, I really don't believe it's going to change. One of my favorite things about stories is one of my favorite things about my favorite stories is when they seem to have a very determined beginning, middle, and end. Like you had something like Breaking Bad, which I don't know if it's true, but one of the sort of like the myths about that show is there was some discussion about lengthening it, and the creators were like, no, this is the end. We know what the end is, and we're not gonna, I don't want to stretch something out. I don't want the story to not be as taut as I had planned for it to be, and as taut as would feel good to me as a reader. So it was initially planned for 4 books, and I expect and intend to finish it in 4.
I would argue more things need to do that. There's a lot of things that should have died a long time ago. So, okay. Well, so let's finish with the sign off here. If you wouldn't mind telling anyone who's watching this after the replay or in the comments now where they can find you, where they can look for your works, if they want to find out more about your art after this.
Oh yeah, thank you very much again. Thanks for having me on the show, guys. An absolute pleasure to speak to all of you. You've been so incredibly kind and wonderful questions, so I appreciate that most of all. And yeah, if you're looking for me anywhere, the books should be in most of the retailers around, online and offline. Go to your favorite one, the one that you want to support the most. Grab the books there if you can. Online, I am probably the most on Twitter, although I've kind of been pulling back a little bit and not being on there as often. Who knows why, but it's just felt a little different. But yeah, no, I haven't been on Twitter as much, but I'm Evan Winter, at Evan Winter on Twitter. And that's probably where I am the most online.
Wonderful. Just in case people don't know, my 2 co-hosts, wonderful co-hosts who are here, let's tell the people where they can find you as well. Maybe Steve and then PL, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. You can find me at Steve Talks Books or Steve Talks Movies on YouTube or at pagechewing.com.
Okay, you can find me largely beside my 2 wonderful co-hosts, Stephen Taylor on Page Chewing on either of their channels. You can find my reviews Before We Go blog, led by the incredible Beth Tabler. Taylor and I are assistant editors, and Steve is also a blogger there. You can find my reviews there and on Goodreads. For the books, www.peelstore.com. The John Kingdom Saga, 2 books out now, 1 book coming, out in a 7-book series. And Twitter, thank you, Taylor. And Twitter is at Peelstore Writes, preferred social media handles. But I just want to quickly say again, this has been a huge fanboy moment because I love these books and this series. Evan is such a phenomenal writer, and I will read everything he writes. And I cannot wait for Lord of Demons.
Oh, honored and thank you.
And in case you are watching this episode and don't know who I am, by some for some strange reason. Hi, my name is Taylor. This is my booktube channel, Made Between the Pages. This is mostly where you can find me. You can also find me on Steve's channel when he's the host of Page Chewing. You can find me, as PL said, on Before We Go blog. But the best place is probably this channel, which always has links to my Twitter and all of that other stuff. And before we go, I wanted to make sure I put this comment up because this is our goal. Really great to listen to this conversation. Definitely moving Evan's books up on the TBR. And that just means
do
success.
Do it. You won't be sorry. Do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kehot, and thank you, Page Chewing, for that. Then see.
Yeah. Literally anytime. We were so excited to have this discussion.
Wow.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us in the comments, anyone watching afterwards, and thank you once again, Evan, for joining us here. It was a delightful conversation, and we can't wait to see you guys on the next episode. So thank you guys for coming. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.